Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 5. This week, we're going to talk about learning and memory and product positioning, kind of a mix of all the things. The reality is that as marketers, it's very important when we get out into a very noisy world, whether that's advertising, social media, word of mouth, whatever. We really need to make sure that our customers have recall. So if you go into the field of advertising and communication, one of the things that you're going to want to do is measure the effectiveness of that ad. Of course, ultimately, the effectiveness of the ad is going to be conversion. Did they purchase the product or service? But realistically, sometimes it takes a little bit, especially the higher the involvement that the product has. Sometimes it will take a little bit longer, and you want to make sure that the recall is high enough that you become a part of their consideration set. Are these alternatives that I'm considering? For example, if I'm purchasing a car, have I paid enough attention to the advertising to make sure that the Subaru or the Mercedes or whatever ads I might have seen give me enough recall so that they become a part of the consideration set? So let's talk a little bit about it. So there's this idea that we really want to minimize memory interference, and we want to memorize the idea of recall. So let's jump into it. So what about the strength of learning? There's 6 different ways that learning is strengthened, if you will, how important that message is, the involvement, the mood of the person at the time, and the mood that the ad will generate. A lot of times we talked about in lecture 4 that we'll try to pull on heartstrings a little bit because of that emotional response versus that cognitive response. Repetition, we see ads that we looks like a mistake sometimes where they're run back to back to back to back to back. That's not a mistake. I mean, that is to enhance and reinforce and create some repetition there. And we call that bookending. That a lot of times we'll call it, I want a bookend ad. That's how I've oftentimes referred to it when I have purchased a lot of advertising. So let's talk about memory interference here. When they have when an individual has difficulty retrieving a specific information. So sometimes this is confusing because they'll get it confused with other products. That is, an unfortunate worst case scenario. We hope that does not happen. And so if a competitor has similar types of product attributes, similar types of positionings, then this interference can happen. And I'm sure you've seen that. Oh, I think that's this, but in fact, it was a totally different brand. I wonder if I purchased that here. That is the same sort of thing. So competitive advertising definitely causes memory interference. So when we think about brand image, we think about all of these sort of things. And for those of you who have had me in other classes, you've probably heard me refer to this idea that marketing is a vehicle. And if you haven't heard that whole sort of thing, it takes a couple of minutes, but it makes so much more sense in how, if marketing is a car and we've got 4 wheels, product, price, place, and promotion, we've got the engine, that's the customer, we've got the body of the car, that is the brand, right? It's all the sexy pieces, the GPS, the in-dash navigation, the leather seats, whatever. And then we've got, the chassis of the car, which theoretically, you could build a sports car and a minivan on the same sort of chassis. So if you think about something that is selling a, just a basic burger like a McDonald's versus a burger that you might find at a steakhouse, ultimately they're serving the same need. I am hungry, right? That big ultimate need that you would have, say, in Porter's hierarchy of needs. It's a basic need that's being fulfilled. But then your branding is so much different, right? They have different customers, they have different tires that they're focusing on, or wheels, if you will. And so that's kind of how we do this positioning. How are we going to position it in the mind of the consumer so that it makes a little bit of sense? So product positioning is something that we try to achieve as a, this brand, and it affects pricing. It affects a number of different things. If I'm positioning myself as a low cost, something like the great value brand that you would find at Walmart, I mean, that is product positioning in one way. If you position yourself as a Del Monte or something that's a little bit more expensive, it can't be that we're just simply fulfilling the need to food. Well, we're high quality. We have better flavors. We have all these sort of things. They're trying to position themselves and justify the price differential there. So some of the important components of brand positioning is that it's situational, right? The types of situations and appealing to these sort of different consumers. what you're going to be working on a little bit in week 5 is this journey mapping or perceptual mapping. This is how we ultimately decide how we're going to position a product or service. How is the customer using it? How are the customers coming to us? Why are they using it? How are they using it? And how can we leverage that to be different than our competitors? It's very important to do a SWOT analysis, not necessarily on yourself, but on your competitors, so that you can see their strengths and how to compete against them. You can look at their weaknesses and how you can differentiate yourself to kind of rise above their weaknesses and say, hey, we're not weak in that area. Their opportunities may also be your opportunities, and their threats may also be your threats. So it's very important to do that for your top customers, your top competitors, I mean, and try to figure out the best place to fit, and that fit is how you position yourself. Okay, this is a perceptual map. You will do a little bit of that in your assignment. We won't stay too long on that. That is in the lecture notes. You can look at it. It's also given a bit more detail in the book. But what about product repositioning? Sometimes something just isn't working, right? I mean, sometimes you have the distinct advantage because you're new to market, you're novel and unique and all of these sort of things. And then, as you get laggards and you get sort of, the product starts to drop off a little bit, you have to reposition yourself. You're not as interesting to people. So sometimes the level of a performance will, kind of promote a product repositioning. Who uses the product? Sometimes we have to kind of, dive down and say, well, that's not working. We're not seeing this group purchase this as much anymore. So who's going to use that product? And that's why we reposition it, to try to jumpstart the product again, get more customers to use it, generate more revenue from the sales of that product or service as well. That's why we do that product positioning. And I've done this for a number of companies, and oftentimes you kind of get into a position where this is what you do. You go in for a period of a couple of years and you work very specifically on identifying the ability for them to reposition their product for a new market, a new customer, a new application, if you will. And then, of course, after that couple of years, you're almost biased to the product, and it's time to kind of move on and do that for someone else. You really have a narrow window to be unbiased and come in and create a strong repositioning campaign. Okay. What about brand equity? These are some of the things that we've talked about in principles of marketing, but we'll refresh here. Brand equity, this is the value that we would assign to the brand above the functional type of use. For example, a Rolex is a watch, it keeps time, but its brand equity is so much higher because it attaches itself to this idea of self-esteem and luxury and status. And so the brand equity is so much higher. It's coveted item, if you will. Brand leverage. This is, these are, the idea of family extensions, brands, umbrella branding, all of that. I love a Diet Dr. Pepper. It is my one vice and my one addiction in life. But certainly there are other ones, like there's Dr. Pepper Zero, there's regular Dr. Pepper cream soda, there's Dr. Pepper cherry. There's all of these, and we look at these sort of brand extensions, and that's leveraging the strength of an individual brand across a number of different types of products to try to take those consumers who are, very brand loyal and convert them into these other product lines as well. And that generates more revenue. Okay, what are some of the motives? What are motives? This is something that will compel an individual to act, right? Motivations are the reason why we do things. When we teach the teams and we teach HR and things like that, we're asking people, what motivates somebody to do something? How can you get them to be more productive in that sense, in an operational sense? But from a customer, what can you do to motivate them to make more purchases? And that is very important for us to understand. How can we increase the frequency of the purchase? Needs. I talk a lot about needs. Needs are super important. This is why am I using it? What are my innate needs? Biological needs. I'm hungry. Food, water, air, shelter, things like that. But then I have acquired needs. This is a response to my cultural environment. So certainly food would be an innate need. I am hungry. I have to eat. Do I have to eat a $50 burger? Nah, that may be an acquired need. So there's a kind of this difference in what we're doing, and different brands satisfy different needs. They're not all going to be this high luxury coveted type of brand. Some of them need to be, low cost and, mass available type needs. And they're generating their profitability based on sheer quantity, and the others are not necessarily on quantity, but because their profit margins are so much higher because they're selling fewer of them. Okay, Here we go. Interesting, interesting. The consumer motivation process. So this week you're going to work on some journey mapping, and I want you to consider what this consumer motivation process might look like. I've got, needs fulfillment. I've got unmet needs. I've got this sort of duality that's competing with each other, right? And my unfulfilled need could be, status and self-esteem and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be those basic needs. It could be I have an unfulfilled need and then I'm saving for it. If I have an unfulfilled need to travel to another country and it's not something that I can readily afford, maybe I put back $5 every pay period or something like that. And that's a way that's kind of a map that I use to get there. So think through this as well. Let's look at individuals here. Despite the fact that we tend to have to group, we can't really market to individuals. We're marketing to groups of people who are very like-minded. They think, act, and look like them. And when I say look, I don't mean in the physical sense, but look like them from a consumer perspective. They have these similarities in the way that they have tensions and motivations and need states and all of these sort of things. So while we want our product to appeal to an individual and we want that individual to feel like we're speaking directly to them, which is some of the messaging that we do in social media, that one-to-one feeling, ultimately, they are a part of that larger group. We think about that segmentation, targeting, and positioning, right? So we're in there in that targeting. We're targeting these individuals and giving them this idea that there is a personalized product or service for them, despite the fact that they are like a group of other individuals. Okay, what about this is so true. I cannot say this enough, and I'm going to repeat this right from the screen. Savvy companies define their brands in terms of consumer needs that they satisfy, not the products that they sell. How am I satisfying your need? If I'm able to satisfy your need, if I'm able to create value, that's not pricing. If I'm able to create value, that's bang for your buck, and you come to me over and over again, how do I create a heavy user, frequent user? And that is where we're at. Even if I'm something for a luxury brand, I still want to create that kind of loyalty. And even their definition of a heavy user, frequent user might be a little bit different because the purchase cycle is so much longer. A heavy user for somebody like a Rolex, maybe every 3 years. A heavy user for somebody like McDonald's, maybe 3 times a month. So you kind of have to think of how that brands. But this is how we have to understand the consumer well enough to know how to motivate them by understanding their needs. Okay. What are the 3 facets of needs? Well, we need that they are never fully satisfied, right? We live in a consumptive society. Even a basic need like food is not fully ever satisfied. You may be satisfied for temporarily satisfied, but then you need to have that need met over and over and over again. New needs emerge as old ones are satisfied. That is true, right? I've heard someone joke one time. I said, you do so well for yourself. And he said, yeah, the more you make, the more you spend. And that is so true. As you see that, you have these new needs arise. Frustration with the inability to fulfill a need may generate a defense. If I'm unable to do something, then I feel upset and defensive about that. And I'm trying to find a way to fulfill that need. And on a basic level, that's certainly true. But even in terms of the self-actualization and self-esteem, we really want to be able to fulfill those needs. And we strive, and that creates a lot of ambition. The higher the consumptive society, the more unmet needs are, and the more people will be ambitious to try to fulfill those needs. Okay, what about theories of behaviors? I've talked a lot about Maslow's, this hierarchy of needs, human motivation theory, and the theory of motivation. But let's talk about Maslow, because this really is such a simple and easy way to look at buyer behaviors and what motivates them, right? These biological needs. I want food and I need, air and water and shelter and all of these sort of things. And as we move up, safety needs, social needs, self-esteem needs. This is where we start getting higher and higher into these sort of high-end luxury brands, and they're positioning themselves at the tippy top of this, and they're leveraging that. I'm going to buy, a luxury item because it makes me feel good. And that is the type of esteem and self-actualization that you see there. I've made it. Versus biological, I'm hungry. Here in a little bit, I'm going to go get a sandwich because I'm hungry, and it fulfills a biological need. Okay, McClelland's human motivation theory. We look at these sort of 3 tiers of achievement, affiliation, and power. just really another sort of way of restating Maslow's and what they've done. You can see here some of the characteristics, achievement, this need to accomplish, this ambition, this affiliation. They want to belong. They want to belong to a group of people, and therefore they tend to do those sort of things. We see that a lot with, especially with teenagers and clothing and apparel and those sort of things. If other people have something, then others want it as well. Likewise, if one person has it, they can sometimes be a little bit outcast. My son, when he was much younger, in seventh grade, he had received as a gift from grandparents an Apple Watch, and none of the other kids at the time had an Apple Watch, and he wore it to school and got made fun of. So affiliation works two ways, right? You can be outcast if you don't have something, but you can be outcast if you're the only one who does have something. And I another kind of story of that, again, teenagers tend to be somewhat fickle and more in this affiliation as a motivator. When I was in high school, we had a very wealthy young man who drove a new Corvette. And we lived in a very small town that did not have much money at all. People probably were more comfortable, driving tractors and things. You think of the movie Footloose, that's the kind of town we lived in. And so it really stood out, and it alienated him in a way that was maybe not as comfortable as his parents thought that was going to work for him. Okay. And then, of course, power. We want to influence others. We want to be in control. And we see this in a number of different things with celebrities, high-ranking executives, politicians, etc. That's a real extreme example of that. Okay. The Deichner's theory of motivation, it's same thing: power, status, masculinity, femininity, these duality of those two, security, reward, and eroticism, that as we're kind of looking at the same sort of pyramid structure. For me, it's easy to really focus on one of these that makes the most sense to you. Maybe it's McClelland's because it has three. Maybe it's Maslow's because you've looked at it so many times. But whatever that is, I highly encourage you to pick one of these and really focus through when you're thinking about the need state and the journey map of the customer throughout this course, and as you apply it when you get into your professional careers as well. I'm going to leave this one and let you hop into that. Okay. Motivation, as we talked about before, this is a reason for behavior. This is an unobservable inner force that creates a stimulus for us, this internal stimulus. So we have to create this idea of insight. So there's a couple of things here. I'm not going to jump into it because this, again, talks about hierarchy of needs. This is a macro theory, this overarching theory that discusses why people behave the way they do, requires psychological motives. It's detail motives that are attached to it. I definitely recommend taking a look at that. If you're going to be in the field of consumer insights, or you're going to be in the field of behavior marketing, these are very important to look at, but just know that they're there, and it's one of the psychological ways that we look at individuals as consumers. And then kind of from a Maslow perspective, that would be a sociological, this group phenomenon of why they act that way. So big, little, sociological and psychological, kind of the difference if you didn't know the difference between sociology and psychology. Okay. All right. Motivation theory. Let's see here. When we're going to jump into this a little bit, this idea of involvement. How involved is an individual? And that is a strong indicator of motivation, right? If I take certain actions and I do certain things, if we kind of pull this back to something like social media, it might make a bit more sense, since we've all are familiar enough with social media, even if you don't have a social media account. When we look at something like someone is following an account, a brand, then they take an action to like, or share, or then comment. So these are all higher levels of involvement, which indicate higher levels of engagement, meaning I'm more likely to purchase. Going from a like to a share to a comment, all of these are higher levels of engagement, and that's correlated with this conversion, this likelihood to purchase. So when we think about involvement, we can kind of think about it in that way, and it makes a little bit more sense because it provides us with some context. Okay. Motivational conflict. There is an approach motivational conflict. This is a choice between two alternatives. Do I want the Subaru? Do I want the Toyota? There's this choice between two conflicts: approach avoidance, a choice between a positive and a negative consequence, right? Maybe I'm taking a job for money, but I don't love it. Or maybe I'm taking a job because I love it, but it's not for money. You've got to figure out that approach avoidance conflict, and then avoidance motivational conflict. It only involves these undesirable outcomes. We hear this often referred to as the lesser of two evils. So that's kind of an avoidance motivational conflict. Personality, these are the individual's characteristic responses. This is how they have a tendency to respond. Motivation is directly linked to personality because there's this innate internal force. Personality will tend to guide a consumer and direct that sort of behavior. You have an outgoing personality. If you have kind of a more reserved personality, these can play into your motivation and your ability and desire to be involved in that motivation. So, okay, the multi-trait approach. This is a 5-factor model, and it has these different traits that are formed by genetics and early learning, right? What we learned in kindergarten, we learned all the way up, right? So that kind of idea for that. And then we have this single trait approach. This is consumer ethnocentrism. It's this idea and this desire for uniqueness. And I will say that over the past 15 years, this desire for consumer ethnocentrism, this desire to be unique, have things personalized, is huge. We see more and more and more of that, of individuals' desire to have things customized. For example, I couldn't just go buy a pair of Converse off the shelf. No, I went to their page and I had one custom made. My husband had a purse made for me as well. So there's this idea that we want things personalized, and that's a single trait approach. Okay, we will hop down a little bit and figure out, this idea of using personality in marketing practice. It's interesting. There's this way. Sometimes we choose a product that fits our personality, right? This fits me. This is what I do. Sometimes we step outside. I mean, if we think about, for example, when you're looking at apparel and clothing and things like that, sometimes we buy something because we're like, oh, this is what I always get. This is what's comfortable for me. And then sometimes we go in and we think, I want to be something different. I want to do something different. I feel different. Maybe it's a situational type of thing. I got a new job. I got a new haircut. I'm dating someone new, or whatever it is. And sometimes we use products to bolster that personality that we feel like we're weak in. Maybe I'll wear a bolder color and it makes me feel more outgoing. So there's that sort of consideration as to how people are using it and why they're using it. If you'll look at a place, for example, like an H&M, you'll go in and you see that very much depicted, right? These sort of wilder kind of options, and then these sort of more professional sort of options to appeal, to someone's more probable personality than this other one to push people into something. Or they'll use certain types of accessories and maybe one item of clothing just to take it just that little edge further, to encourage people to do that, because marketers want to be able to satisfy both of those types of personalities within an individual. Okay, brand image. As we've said, this is what people think and feel of when they see a brand. How does a brand make me feel? Maybe you hear a brand and you think, oh, I don't like their politics. I don't like what they're doing. I don't love that brand. Another person's like, no, I love this brand because it's, it provides all of these benefits to me. So different people perceive brands differently and for different reasons. Maybe your friend hasn't even thought about the political type of narrative that the brand is pushing. So there you go. Some people might like Chick-fil-A because of the values they represent. Some people might like Chick-fil-A because it's fast and convenient and they love the chicken. So different sorts of things. Brand personality, that's a set of human characteristics that become associated with the brand. And we can see that as well. People will associate with different athletic brands. Certainly, this idea that there's this humanized characteristic. If we think of something like a Lululemon, we tend to think of that as a more upscale, expensive type of person. And so that's a human characteristic that we would attach to that. Okay, the use of personality. We want to make sure people see our personalities in our brand because that makes people connect with them in an emotional and affective way, right? Not the cognitive that we talked about, but the affective, because that can drive so much more brand affinity, sales, etc. You are more loyal to a brand that you feel an emotional connection with. So there are three different ways that we tend to do that. Celebrity endorsers, we try to push celebrities to give us that emotional sort of personality that we're trying to create that. This imagery, a lot of times, again, that veers towards the emotional. They want to pull at some heartstrings or show you the excitement or show you how great someone's life is when they choose this product or service. And then these executional factors. Let's kind of talk through the emotion. This is a feeling. We know what emotions are, but this is what we try to do as marketers, is create an emotion around our product, because that creates that greater brand affinity. Okay, there are some dimensions of emotions that we have to consider: pleasure, arousal, and dominance. So these are a couple of different dimensions that we consider. Is it pleasurable? Did it give me, did it make me feel like I was in power? That's not entirely different than the McClellans, right? Where we have that affiliation in power and things like that. This is along the same lines, except it's driven from emotions and not motivation. Let's think about emotions and marketing strategy. Well, the consumers really want something where they are, they're aroused in some way, and not in necessarily a sexual sense, but that they feel some sort of completion, right? They feel some sort of gratitude. They feel good about themselves. It's a desirable outcome. That's what we mean by arousal in this sense. And then, of course, the emotion reduction as a product benefit. We want to reduce certain sort of negative things in our life, right? There are, if you look at commercials for Charmin, they're reducing something negative in someone's life, right? You are going to walk away clean and happy and all of these sort of things if you use our products versus perhaps another brand of toilet paper. Okay. When we think about emotions and marketing, we also think about consumer coping. This idea of avoidance, this idea of support and things like that. There are a number of different products that provide that. You start seeing this particularly in things. It's interesting in cosmetics and these items that are used to prevent or help stave off aging and things like that. They provide some support. They have this avoidance, and it's a way that individuals tend to cope with this idea. I don't feel older, but I'm looking older. So we consider some of that a part of our consumer and emotional intelligence and who that buyer is and why they're using us. So we have to be very kind of careful in how we navigate those messages and that positioning. Dove has gotten themselves in a pickle a couple of times because they've taken it in just a way that it was slightly inappropriate. You can look up some of that on YouTube, Dove inappropriate advertising and how they cross the line a little bit. But then they also tend to do a very good job in trying to make people feel younger and natural and happier and things like that. So they always walk that line, and it doesn't always work out for them. And sometimes there is consumer backlash. Okay. Let's look at what about emotional content? This can enhance attention, as I've said before. These emotional messages, they give us this sense of gratitude, this sense of well-being. They pull on the heartstrings. If you adopt a pet for $1 a day, then you're saving millions of pets. And look at this poor animal with fleas and flies flying all around it, and how cute he is. That is an emotional arousal message to try to prevent something that you would otherwise attach a negative idea with, a negative emotion with, or avoidance. So that is something that we do. And they'll do a repeated exposure, as we've talked about before, that repetition to try to drive that message home and try to influence and motivate an individual for a certain type of action or a purchase, if you will. Okay, so that is motivation, emotion, and all of that, and all the psychology of consumers. And it's very, very interesting. And if you're interested in this, I certainly encourage you to dig down deeper into some of these emotional and motivation theories and things like that, because they're very interesting in why and how consumers act and react the way that they do. I will let you go on this one, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much for joining me.